extra time.
Initial thoughts on the team's performance over the last couple of days?
Yeah, an outstanding performance. I sort of said it recently, but I don't think the result reflected how competitive the match was. I think perhaps another 50 more runs from Indians' perspective would have made it quite a balanced looking match. The surface offered throughout the whole game, so if we're able to put the ball in the right area for long periods of time, as we saw both teams, you'd create opportunities and therefore get some reward. And so it was, both games were a really good balance, I suppose, in terms of the surface between bat and ball, and runs were quite tough to come by. Had to perhaps have a little bit of fortune go your way and then try and put a bit of pressure on the bowlers versus the seamers in particular, obviously just trying to hit a hard length and watch the ball react. So a great performance over these last two games from the guys. I guess you look at the surfaces and they perhaps were both seam bowler friendly. But I think as a batting unit as well, the contributions that were made to get us to parity in the first innings of this game and in Wellington to get competitive totals on the board on these surfaces were really pleasing to see.
Kane, does this series win sit in the context of the summer? Because it's been up and down summer, but to beat India 2-0 at home is a significant victory. Yeah,
it's a brilliant effort. We all know how strong India are all around the world, and there's been a lot of talk about their pace bowling attack, and they certainly showed their quality in this series, and it was a very, very competitive series. But it was nice from our team's perspective to make that adjustment, that step up from a tough series in Australia, and put out a couple of strong performances. So a brilliant effort. As you mentioned, the summer's is varied a lot. That can be the nature of the sport that we play, but a lot of learnings from all results that we've had. So important to build on these, and obviously we don't put on the whites again for a long period of time, but those conditions will be quite different to these ones as well. So a lot to take from it against the best Test team in the world at the moment. So a brilliant result.
Kane, just from a batting point of view, when you go to a place where you're not used to the conditions that you don't encounter too often, what do you do as a batsman to try and get adjusted, or how do you adapt as soon as possible?
Yeah, I mean it's a real challenge of the international game, and an enjoyable challenge as well, because conditions are a massive factor, and trying to adapt quickly and you come over to the conditions that we've had in these last two games, and even if you do adapt quickly, you still might have a good ball with your name on it, and that's part and parcel of, I suppose, within your own mindset to have that understanding that that your positions are good and the mindset's strong, but you still have to accept that there are things outside of your control. And I think we saw throughout this game the number of balls that were reacting off the surface, and a little bit in the last game as well, that can be quite challenging to negotiate. So trying to adapt, as quickly as possible, whether that's from one country to another or throughout the different formats, is very, very important.
Daniel Kane?
Hi, Kane.
No, sorry, Daniel at the back.
That's right. Not often, Kane, do going in England, Australia, and you're back to back to back. If you take a step back on the whole sort of space, how do you judge your own side's performances and where you are as a Test side?
Yeah, I mean, probably the three top Test teams in the world, and we all have them in the one go, which obviously going into it was going to be and was very much a very, very tough challenge. And we talk about the quality of the opposition, but obviously the difference in conditions as well, and that has a factor. But disappointing, I suppose, showing in Australia. But then at the same time, it was important that when we were playing at home, we continued to try and play the style of cricket that was important to us, and playing well and ultimately trying to get results in our conditions. And we saw that against two very, very strong sides. So a lot of positives and a lot of learnings from that Australian experience as well.
All right, 4 years to go.
Kane, not from a batsman's perspective, but just as a captain, do you think the pitch we saw here could be a blueprint that you would like to see New Zealand pitches behaving like? Maybe it prepares you better when you tour Australia or South Africa, more pace?
Yeah, I mean the pace in the surface was probably more closely aligned to some of the surfaces in Australia. Maybe not so much the sideways movement, which we saw throughout, but that made a really sort of sporting balance between bat and ball. So it was something that was a little bit new for us as well. We've seen the conditions here in Christchurch, but in Wellington as well, where it often does a bit early, and then it certainly becomes a batting friendly type surface, and then it becomes guys putting in and bowling long overs and trying to create pressure over long periods of time to get that reward. Whereas the last two games the reward was a little bit quicker because the surfaces were slightly different to what we've had in the past. But at the same time, I think it's great. When you see Test cricket where there is that balance, whether it's early in the back end of a game or perhaps here, I think that the added pace meant that with the sideways movement, there was perhaps always a ball with your name on it.
One on Trent, you face a lot of them in the nets and it seems to trouble you a lot. So apart from the obvious win that he generates, what makes him such a difference?
I did notice you've been hanging out by the nets a lot when we've been training. Yeah, is that the most recent observation? No, he's a fantastic bowler, and when the ball is moving, he's a great exponent of putting it in the right area from that left arm angle and getting that movement. And whether that's in the nets or whether that's out in the middle, it's obviously very challenging to face. And I thought the plans that we looked to adopt and how he came around the wicket and changed that angle was brilliant. Even when perhaps it felt like that the pace of the wicket. Bro, can you tell her to ring back? Would you just like the song, do you? Hey. Look, he's outstanding in these two games, and in fact, I think a lot of his strengths was when he came back after his initial spell with a slightly older ball and brought a lot of intensity, and that's something that I guess we're being used to see from Trent, but it was nice after a period of time off, and he certainly brought that for us.
All right, last couple, Brendan.
Came off the quote, just to elaborate on what you said about Trent, what impressed you the most about them in this series? Obviously after a pretty tough tour of Australia where those guys didn't get a lot of reward.
Yeah, I think as a cricketer, you're trying to find ways to use the conditions to the best of your ability to try and, create pressure and create wicket-taking opportunities. In Australia, that was very, very tough to do from our seamers, but throughout this series, we did have that movement, and we had the discipline from our bowlers to put the ball bowled very much a fuller length and sort of watch the ball move in both directions, which is obviously quite a challenging thing to negotiate from a batting perspective. And the Indian side did that as well, and it was obviously very challenging. So I think the best part in this game as well was playing the extra seamer is sometimes a challenge because guys' workloads can change, and they're used to perhaps bowling one spell and then swinging around from the other end, whereas they all bought into a slightly different philosophy by playing that extra seamer, and they all complemented each other beautifully throughout this match, so we could keep trying to build that pressure by having aggressive options at either end. So it was great, an awesome opportunity for Kyle Jamieson throughout the series, a brilliant start to his Test career, and with bat and ball. So a lot of positives throughout this series.
One more just on Kyle. What's he brought with his bowling, and has he already asked to bat higher in the order?
He hasn't come up to me and said that directly yet, but he is batting beautifully, and obviously can truly bat in terms of his technique and how he looks to approach his innings. So, and his runs throughout this series were incredibly valuable because runs were quite tough to come by because of the nature of the surface. So very valuable runs, but in terms of his complementary to the attack, we always look at a balanced attack and what guys can bring in some, I guess, different threats, I suppose, that you're always trying to introduce, and naturally his height, the bounce that he gets, but bowls a very, very good line as well to challenge guys around that fourth stump. Was brilliant to see, and in both first innings of both games was huge in us building a bit of pressure and taking some key wickets as well.
Last two wicket, Raj.
Kane, just like in ICC limited over tournaments where ICC plays a bigger role in managing the tracks so that batting and bowling both teams get similar sort of a go. Do you think in ICC Test Championship as well they should take a more stronger role to ensure that home team doesn't get too much advantage and we don't end up with Test match finishing in 3 or 4 days?
Yeah, I mean, that's I guess an interesting thing. I suppose the most important part to any game is to see a balance between bat and ball, and whether ICC I guess encourage that or somebody else. But from my perspective, that's always the best thing to see, is to see a balance between bat and ball versus versus the toss being the deciding factor, which is never nice to see. And I think even though in these two games the ball obviously moved considerably throughout, and the toss is always nice to win, but I don't think it was the sole factor in results, because both teams were able to generate that movement throughout the games. I thought India, and particularly in their first innings with the ball, we had a number of fortunate, I guess, periods of play where it could have looked quite different, and they were immaculate in their areas. And when you do that, and you are perhaps nicking the ball or doing these other things that you don't want to do, and the ball is moving around, things can look quite different. So, I do think that's why they are number one at the moment, is their ability to play in all conditions and all around the world. But it was a great series for us, and nice to bounce back from Australia.
Last one, Karak.
Kane, correct me if I'm wrong, but did you use the heavy roller there, and what sort of thinking went into it, and what impact did it have, especially on the initial part of your chase? Yeah,
we would have used the heaviest roller possible, and the one that they had wasn't overly heavy. So, but look, it was sort of taking, I guess, little scallops or divots or throughout the whole game, really. So, our philosophy was to put the heavy one on and try and flatten those out. It's not really something that we use very often here, because usually it does a bit early and then it sort of flattens out. So that was our thinking, and I don't think it worked, but you only try, don't you, and move on. But it was a wicket that offered throughout, which made batting, and I think the contributions from our batting lineup and those small partnerships of, I guess, 30, 40 and above, and the 100 partnership that was today was outstanding for us.
Hit the subscribe option and the bell icon to get all the exclusive sports videos on Extra Time.